It's time for Type 40 Live once again at the start of another geeky week, and we're across your view screen as always on Rumble, X, YouTube and Facebook, keeping track of all 5 dimensions for all things Doctor Who and serving our takes back to a live chat full of fellow friends, fans and companions just like you. And as December begins, we begin a run of special editions, different but the same, this time with a guest panelist who's no stranger to independent media. Yeah, young Bob, he's here. He's coming up all for a chat with us here at Type 40 Live, wherever that may go. No holds barred. But as always, we've got some snacks and drinks to hand. Stay tuned. And we are gently lit by the console room there. Oh, it's almost warming, isn't it? I think it's just what we need on a winter's night. It's still not Christmas. I don't care what anyone says, just because it's December. None of that nonsense here, not on my watch. I'm Dan Hadley, Birmingham's King of the Geeks. Welcome back. Hello, everybody there on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and X. Thanks for the comments already. We'll get to them in due course. I don't doubt we'll find out who you are. And yeah, we'll see what happens, won't we? What we cover between us here as the week kicks off once more. So yeah, stick around and we'll see where it goes. Now, I'm not alone. I'm never really alone, am I? And thankfully for me, I have some able support in the form of Charlotte Shields. Hello, Charlotte.
Hello, everybody. You say it's not Christmas, but for the last week, they've been playing Christmas songs on the radio. So
who are they?
You need to have a chat with the radio people, because I've heard Pogues, I've heard Wham, I have heard Wizard, I've heard them all.
Pogues. They sound like Smurfs, but they're really not, are they?
No, to be fair, that's my favourite Christmas song. And that probably says a lot about me.
Fairy Tale of New York. I would have been guessing all night. There's no way I would have picked you for a Pogues and Kirsty MacColl fan.
No, and it has to be the proper version, not
Uncut?
The nice, clean version. Yeah.
Everybody thinks you're sweetness and light, and yet you go for the uncut version. Who'd have thought?
You learn stuff every day, folks.
Doesn't this look like an open fire, though, this console room, the way it's sort of lit and bathed in?
The way the console has those beam things in Capaldi, it did have that feeling, didn't it?
Means that Christmas is coming, of course, and I've been thinking of you, well, thinking of all of you, really, all of the panelists, because I've noticed that there's an official Doctor Who Christmas jumper, believe it or not. That's this, so this is on sale now on Amazon, and it says a festive essential for any Doctor Who fan, ideal for gifting or adding some sci-fi flair to your Christmas cosplay outfit. So what do you think of that? If I got that for Sarah, what did you think she'd make of it?
Sarah would give you a look. To be fair, I like how the TARDIS looks a little bit like 8-bit, like old Nintendo games.
Yeah.
Like that's the vibe it's giving me. So I do like the TARDIS. It's just a bit busy everywhere else, but I suppose that's the point of a Christmas jumper, isn't it?
A bit busy. You could say that again. Yeah, a lot of people really go for this stuff. You know, it's got that sort of kitsch, kind of postmodern thing, as if to say, oh, isn't it awful? Isn't it fabulous? That kind of stuff. It's not really to my taste, but I get the joke. I think I get the joke. Maybe I'm too old or too young. I think we need a second, but we need a third opinion, really, don't we? And I can't think of anybody better than our guest for this edition of the show. So, yes, as this time we've invited along someone who's... I suppose he's quite a natty dresser, really, when out debating and commentating on social and political matters. But he's also the host of the Sideshow Bob on YouTube and youth ambassador for Turning Point UK too, among other things. It also turns out, though, I discovered quite recently that he's a big Doctor Who fan. So, yeah, welcome to Type 40 Live, young Bob.
How you doing, my friend?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Warming up very nicely for a winter's night. How are you finding the cold?
Well, I still have a cold, so apologies if I kind of get a crackly voice halfway through. However, I'm largely acclimatizing. I do a lot of protests and table discussions, so you kind of have to get used to the weather.
Wrap up nice and warm, scarf, hat, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, but that was the thing. Like the first thing that our CEO said, because I always wear this like massive like trench coat and sometimes like a black
I've
scarf. He's like,
seen. It's very
yeah,
natty.
like the first thing he said to me was like, "You definitely dress up like a kid who's really into Doctor Who," and I was like, "Yeah, that's sort of the original concept design, so to speak."
Well, so I bet you must have some thoughts about this then. The official branded Doctor Who Christmas jumper. Is this something you'd like to see? Sort of, you'd like to unwrap this on Christmas morning from underneath the tree? Is this to your taste?
Yeah, I actually largely like
Oh.
the design. I think it's like I'm a massive guy for Christmas jumpers because like everyone just thinks it's inappropriate to wear one. Like I always wear a Christmas jumper come November, so I don't know. Massive. Yeah.
Wow. Early adapter. That's what that is, Charlotte. I didn't think this would play quite as well as it does. They obviously know their market for the jumpers a lot more than they do the show, maybe.
I was going to say, at least it's an original design. Like some of the stuff that I think it was the first lot they showed, it was just reused images, wasn't it? That they'd used previously, like logos and everything,
Yeah.
just plastered on stuff. So at least here there was an actual design and thought gone into it.
The blurbs for these things, which always go somewhat over the odds, it says, "Get ready to travel through time and your festivities with this officially licensed BBC Doctor Who Christmas jumper, perfect for Christmas parties, themed events, or cozy nights in." Oh, I don't know about that. This jumper brings a fun and geeky twist to your holiday wardrobe with vibrant colours and detailed knitted artwork. It's a standout piece, you can say that again, for celebrating Christmas in true Time Lord style. I was going to say, does that sell it any more to you? But it sounds like we've got a sale here with young Bob. Who'd have thought that?
Yeah, I don't need like AI advertisement in order to be sold on a Christmas jumper. And I've just also noticed that there's faces on each of the snowflakes, which is quite interesting.
What do you think? What could that be? Which creature do you think that is? It looks like Corquillian from The Rescue, or which could
be it looks like a lizard thing to me. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah. Let us know there, obviously on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, X, if you can identify that Doctor Who monster. We'll be really grateful. But that's $29.99. Amazon.co.uk. Go and get your Christmas jumper in. They say next day delivery. So, you know, we're at the start of December. It's not Christmas yet. Everybody, not Christmas yet, no matter what they say. But here we are in the console room as ever. We're going to talk lots of Doctor Who and whatever else may come up as always. But Bob, in case people haven't heard of you or seen you, let's fill in some gaps somewhere. I mean, first of all, what I noticed was that you are the youth ambassador for Turning Point UK. Turning Point, I've heard of Turning Point over the years, but I wasn't really ever sure what they did, where they were based, and what kind of movement it is, I suppose. So how do you define what Turning Point is and what's your involvement in it?
Yeah, so Turning Point originally was an organization started in the States during like the pre-Trump period in 2016. And our founder, Charlie Kirk, who of course was assassinated on the 12th of September, kind of just set out doing stands. He was incredibly broke. He always told when he was franchising it in the UK that he was so poor, he would buy the table from Home Depot, then return it on the same day as using it because they couldn't afford to spend literally anything. So it started from a man working in his garage, going to each university, doing stands, and then using that as almost an offshoot to network with people to make chapters. And then those chapters kind of spoke for themselves in terms of mobilizing people towards the conservative movement, electing local Republican candidates. Then just 5 years ago, there was a few people from the UK that kind of sold it to Charlie, not the board at Turning Point USA, that we should franchise to other countries Turning Point, and hopefully setting up a sort of campus-like activism where you get young people involved. You kind of direct them towards the right, because unfortunately within education, it seems like there's mostly a left-wing echo chamber when it comes to the free market of ideas. So we launched about 5 years ago. It didn't go the best. We weren't platformed on any social media platform. We couldn't get verified on X, which means we always had like constant imposters. And we even like MPs like David Lammy was, calling us xenophobic. and then come towards, unfortunately,
well, if David Lammy is criticizing you, then you know you must be on the right track.
Exactly. But unfortunately, I've been working with Turning Point, just doing youth outreach, trying to get in contact with young people that want to get involved with Turning Point. But come the recent assassination of our founder, Charlie Kirk, it just seems like we've been inundated with chapter requests. And a good way of kind of helping with that is by doing stands, because it practically shows students this is what you could be doing. Like, these are the people that you could be speaking with. These are the sort of activities that you could be done with if you actually set up a Turning Point UK chapter. And that was us at the London School of Economics, that picture right there, which we did last week. And then I think this week we're going to do KCL. So that essentially my position boils down to doing debates, helping gratify chapters, and kind of promote Turning Point as an organization that could potentially influence the election through moving young people more towards the right wing.
I get the impression that despite the fact that you are a conservative yourself, and as you've just explained, you view your part as almost bringing a balance to somewhere where there's an imbalance currently in academia. But the broader principle seems to be to encourage a conversation and debate between all parties so that everybody's present as part of a debate. And that way more things can potentially get done if there's more understanding. Is that the principle? Yeah,
look, we're not this sort of indoctrination machine where we just want to turn out 100% conservative population amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. I would prefer to live in a society where people have different viable ideas and they can test with each other in trying to develop them. I think that if you end up with a parliament, for example, that is representative of its people, let's say we didn't live under a first past the post system, we'd largely live in a government that has completely been split because no one has a common understanding amongst one another. And that's why like a two-party system has always been the automatic default, because it's always in each country just tribalism. You have one tribe, your friend has another, and you can't communicate with one another at all. And if the boundary becomes too big, the risks become bigger. You know, wars start out, families break apart, and you're already seeing this on a micro level across nations in the West. And hopefully we want to kind of revert that traction towards civil unrest and more towards a common understanding amongst one another, because we don't want to see actions carried out by the person who assassinated our founder. I would prefer to have a civil discussion.
Yeah, I mean, we love a discussion here on the show, a discussion and a debate. Even though we're all friends, and we have largely the same sort of takes to some degree. There's lots of ways in which we all differ, and we often have quite furious and very sort of hot debates, don't we, Charlotte? And that's part of the fun. But one thing I notice is that because we have people, Bob, on the show who are from Australia, America, and people who watch too and who interact and who write into us, were part of our communities across social media. And what I found is that particularly in the States, young people and children are encouraged to discuss and to debate in school at a very young age in a way that we aren't in Britain, are we?
Yeah, so I would actually largely say that's because of people like Charlie Kirk and other people on the right, because it's not like they're the ones that are like these massive philosophers, but rather they're the activists that make noise when things are not right. So if, for example, the reason why American politics has done so well is because you would have conservatives, have these Q&As, have these debates at university in campus grounds. And, if there was a riot or ruckusing from the people that they disagree with, firstly, that would only prove their point that these people, what they say, doesn't ultimately hold any water. But also it shows the university that these people won't step down. And then it encourages the behavior that these people are promoting. Another thing as well is just that the UK is in a very awkward position when it comes to young people, because university are private ground. I can't go without being invited to many of the universities to do stands. So it largely disables a lot of right-wing movements into universities because student unions are very reluctant to invite us on.
But they will invite people from the other side of the aisle, or people who have different guiding principles, or they're affiliated with. So it's heavily screened, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it's heavily screened. It's also largely the students as well. As soon as you get the students, the institutions are only further strengthened. So, for example, many of left-wing organizations like the Socialist Workers' Party are sort of an adjacent organization to Turning Point, completely on the other side of the left, will be allowed and invited to do stands canvassing for their organization from uni students. So it's almost like the reason why we're blocked is it's a parallel of the institutions and the people themselves. The institutions have largely been, thanks to quite left-leaning professors, teachers, and educators, has entrenched the institutions, then used that to indoctrinate young people. And because these young people are no longer tolerant of our ideas, it just means it's completely unviable to have our opinions on campus. I remember there was one student in particular who did an event with us protesting the Marxist festival at SOAS University, and he was beaten up bloody to a pulp, and nothing was really done towards the students that did that crime, and unfortunately his mental and physical health only went down from there.
That's understandable. I mean, more tolerance, I think, across the board is what's needed, but I think that's sort of a first step on a far longer path. I feel that for several years we've been as community, as a country, devolving, if anything, to the point where the levels of intolerance, lack of communication, it's almost celebrated to not communicate with people, to shut oneself away, both mentally, ideologically, whatever you want to think, and even physically too. I think become very atomized, and none of this helps us all rub along together and accept our differences, certainly, but also find that common ground, the things that bring us together and that we share in the same way that we sort of came together through something as simple and as clean, or as Doctor Who, another British institution, which has also been, I believe, we've come to understand, also infiltrated. I don't think that's any coincidence that all of this seems to have manifest at the same time. I'm sure that we'll talk some more about that as the conversation goes on. We'll find out a little bit more about your tastes in Doctor Who, about how and where you came in and where it could possibly go in the short-term and long-term future, if it has one, of course. But if you'd like to hear more from us, there's the Type 40 podcast. That's across all major podcatchers. So I'm talking about Audible, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, all those places, or our home feed at type40.podbean.com. And if you want more of these live streams, we have an entire playlist full of news, reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs, and deep dives, all there stretching back through the years. If you can stand to hear some of it again, go and pick a favorite, or see which one takes your fancy there and knock yourselves out. Of course, in a couple of weeks' time, it all kicks off again. We've got a re-edit of 1972's The Sea Devils coming up very, very soon. And the opening episodes of the spin-off The War Between the Land and the Sea, running right the way up to Christmas. So there'll be plenty to talk about plenty to get our knickers in a twist concerning, I think, Charlotte. It might be fun. I suppose we'll find out as we go, won't we? But we're in it for the duration. Anyway, here on Type 40 Live on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and X. Lots more to talk about. Hope you've got your questions ready too. People there in the live chat. We'll get to you in a little while. We're going to dig a little deeper here with our guest, Young Bob. So, yes, stay tuned.
Now, I suggest you start watching Type 40, because I can't. I've got to watch this little blighter. The job for... I'll have less of that from you, thank you very much. Know your place.
Know your place.
Look, if I have to run up a flight of stairs, you come and find me.
I'll be in the lift.
That's going to the bottom of the floor, then. Keep watching Type 40. There's good chaps.
Yes, Doctor Who, a cultural institution. 62 years of it, Bob. We all sort of join it at different points and then kind of catch up. Well, it used to be in a really sort of analog way, but I think now anything goes. Really, I find whoever we speak to, there's often a very different story to tell, but there's lots of ways in which they all connect. Of course, it's all gone seriously very, very wrong recently. I think that's fairly universally accepted. You'd have to be pretty stubborn to think that this is how they wanted it to be after such a high-profile relaunch again just 2 years ago. There is a Christmas special coming, but not this year. It's next year. Again, written by Russell T Davies. Doctor Who returns Christmas 2026, a whole 12 months to sort of twiddle our thumbs and to speculate and to, I suppose, pick through the wreckage, really, of this cultural institution. A lot of people simply believe that it is gone, dead and buried, and has been for a while, and that we shouldn't really be sort of digging it up. Never mind throwing in more confusion, I suppose, with multiple co-producers and trying to exist on a global stage, as if that's sort of muddying the waters somehow. I'm not sure where it all went wrong precisely, Bob. I think I've got a fair idea who I hold responsible, because clearly, to me, this is another cultural institution which has been completely and utterly co-opted. And we try to be positive about the show because we love it. Of course we do. But as being completely independent voices, we can speak freely, call a spade a spade. And I think most of us know a turd when we see one, when we smell one. And there's been quite an aroma that's been given off by Doctor Who in recent years, hasn't there? It's not been a pretty sight to watch it go downhill.
Yeah, my suspicion is that largely a lot of the core fandom have just been fixated on this idea that it will somehow solve itself. Many people don't want to admit defeat because then that would admit that this show would have to go on ice for a few more years. I think largely what had contributed to the show's downfall is the fact that whenever the show went down in terms of viewership, they just reverted back to one of the other writers. So Chris Chibnall, Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat, they're largely the directors that have been running the show for years now. So I think that there needs to be new writers at the helm.
Two whole decades, Bob. That's a long time for a really quite small set of individuals who largely believe the same things to be steering one particular cultural ship.
Yeah, and it also just means that, so like with Russell, he had a very good way of writing initially for the Ninth Doctor's reign, of being very indirect. And he spoke about this on an interview when it comes to, revitalizing Doctor Who with the Ninth Incarnation. And he spoke about this one show, this one script he wrote about, where it was a husband and wife getting a divorce. And they couldn't say they were getting a divorce. And the dialogue had to be constructed in such a way that the audience very much knew that something was going to happen. And he did this with the 9th and 10th Doctor in terms of many of the plots he was writing into the seasons throughout the different episodes. However, come to the 14th Doctor, the 15th Doctor, he completely lost that trope, and he completely was unable to make things so obvious in the way that the show was directing itself, or making things that were supposedly subtle that were just never there in the first place. Like, for example, the outcome of the companion just being her mother being just a regular mum. Like, that isn't something that has been subtly there from the beginning. You're rather setting up something that isn't meant to have a big outcome. So I think Russell is rather disconnected with his audience. I don't think he knows what people want. And I think he thinks that just giving nostalgia packaged in his form of already dead writing will somehow revitalize the show, when a lot of the audiences that would actually respond well to nostalgia has largely left because of his reign.
Were you excited as we were, Charlotte? Were you excited when they announced Russell was coming back? Sorry, Charlotte.
No, I was ecstatic to find out that he was coming back and that David Tennant was coming back for a special. As soon as I found out that the 13th Doctor regenerated into what turned out to be David Tennant, I was jumping up and down with my whole family watching. However, the first two episodes, just amalgamating ultimately into no payoff, kind of made me fall into despair when it comes to the outcome of the third episode. There wasn't high expectations. And this is throughout media. If people aren't angry or they're not happy about a show and they completely show no emotional intelligence when it comes to the media that they're watching, It demonstrates that people just don't care anymore. If people were angry about the show like they were with the 13th, there was still a way of, salvaging the material, salvaging what Doctor Who stands for. However, if no one really wants to watch it, no one's expecting anything from it, then you have a largely dead show. And that's why many people are calling it to be put on ice before they take any particular direction with Doctor Who. Because come 2026, the Doctor Who special, if it does fall into the same sort of tropes that his last two series have, then ultimately no one's going to want to watch the show, regardless on whoever they can pull out of their pocket.
Yeah, I've sort of been thinking myself, why his current Doctors, and you've got them both on screen, Tennant come back and Ncuti, what's one of the reasons they're not connected? And I've been thinking about this a bit myself. I think there's multiple factors here, but I'm thinking writing, and that's what you were talking about, Bob, before. I think one of the issues is the first time around, he gave them a bit of a drive, the 10th and the 11th Doctor, or he gave them sort of that interesting thing of the Time War, or something to sort of give them those layers, something extra. And it feels like with these two incarnations, they're very thin. There's nothing to really sink your teeth into to get interested. And do you find that, Bob? That's one of the issues you found with the current writing of the Doctor?
Yeah, so if you take a look at, for example, David Tennant, when he was doing the 10th, it was that he was still stoic from being the 9th Doctor. He still had a lot of trauma that had mostly been fulfilled with his last incarnation. However, he was still very much emotional, because David Tennant always, as an actor, portrays a very emotional, vulnerable adult man. So, once that layer of his character has kind of been thinned out, he's just always just emotional, and that's been a common trope of people's critique of the 14th. He largely just seems like someone who was forced into the suit of Doctor Who, and it was David Tennant playing Doctor Who instead of the other way around. So yeah, I just think that it's a great shame that someone who kind of represented this golden age of the modern era had been used to kind of fix what the issues were with the 13th, but then ultimately exacerbate issues further.
I hadn't looked at it like that. You're absolutely right. People would term this a bait and switch, bring back a familiar face written by a writer who was trusted and championed. People had been feverishly hoping that he would return, including some very high-profile fans, to come back and effectively use the show as a platform for every ideology they personally subscribe to, and to push some very divisive, troubling ideas that were simply not fit for a family audience anymore. It's sort of wrong-footed the best of us here. Most of us here at Type 40 and Type 40 Live, we were just as happy as you were to hear that Russell T Davies had come back. And bit by bit, it sort of drained away over a period of time, I think, as the facade started to slip. I mean, the idea, the principle is that every few years, that if Doctor Who goes wrong, certainly during the classic era, this happened, whereby one version of the show may have disenfranchised a few children in some way or another. Maybe some children didn't like the military sort of setting of the third Doctor. They preferred it when he was out in space. And so when the change happened, and very gradually the series sort of morphed into the next version of itself, and filming began, then the idea would be that it would be a factory reset almost, and it could reinvent itself over again, maybe get back some of the viewers that had become slightly estranged from it. But here's the crucial part: attract the next generation of children and of families who could all sit and watch it together. It seems to me, this is something that we've spoken about a lot, isn't it, Charlotte?
Yeah.
That 2 years ago, the comeback of David Tennant, maybe that could have been a moment of unity, I suppose, because it was a celebration, an anniversary. But the casting of his successor was an opportunity again to restock the fan base, to completely reset and grab that next generation of viewers. But if anything, I think that more people than ever have found it completely rebarbative. And now we're at a point where this current generation, who by now, say 2 years into a Doctor's reign, 2 seasons in, will be thinking, oh God, I hope he stays around for a lot longer. There seems to be less awareness of Doctor Who in its exact target demographic than there's probably ever been. What do you think about that as a young man?
So in context, I'm 17 for the people who don't know. However, I think, as you said, Doctor Who has this interesting thing when it comes to marketing, that you have this already established audience from wherever you're watching in terms of what incarnation of the Doctor Who or what the Doctor you're watching. And then when it comes to the next writer of the next Doctor who has their own spin on the show, its own emotion, its own theme, you have to sell it to the next generation and also keep the last in terms of who's watching. So with that, I think Russell, he came off, and if you looked at the last shows that he were writing, they were largely more like social media-esque, like covering issues of social justice. And that is what Russell is best at talking about. He did many interviews coming up to the 14th specials about how he's going to talk about transgenderism, the climate change, all of these different things. And he mostly had dedicated his last few shows that he was writing before he came back to Doctor Who to these matters of social justice. So he surely was just in this echo chamber of yes men on social media and found that that was the sort of target audience that he was going to pinpoint. The younger generation who are on social media, who care about social justice. Now, this sort of sphere that he wanted to direct the show in is largely incompatible with the previous audiences that attracted Doctor Who. So I think that he was trying to sell it to the younger generation. It has worked in small fringes. Like, I'm an ex-drama student. Many of the people that I used to have a drama production in, they absolutely love the show in its current iteration. However, for everyone else, for all of the other audiences that were, as soon as the 13th Doctor regenerated, they said, look, I'll give the specials a go just to see how Russell has changed in terms of his writing style. They've completely gone away, even before the first episode was post, of course, with the special with Davros on how they were going to re-change and refigure his form to be less of what they would call an ableish trope.
Yeah, I think that Davros thing, because we covered that at the time, that seemed to be this sort of real alarm bell moment, if I was to sort of phrase it. Because we hadn't seen any of the actual episodes yet, we hadn't seen the new Doctor yet, and we hadn't really seen what Russell was going to do. So that was almost our first taster. Even though it was sort of meant to be a skit, it was meant to be for children in need. But as soon as you do anything with a character like Davros, you're going to get the established fans interested, even if we're not meant to take it seriously. And I think it was the tone and the way he spoke in that interview and how he was so fervent that that Davros before was a problem. Davros needed to be fixed. Davros was damaging to certain groups before, and he was so coming out blazing with that. And I think that put a lot of fans, and the ones you're talking about, Bob, not this newer generation, the old or the established fans, that's probably the better term, to go, won't stop. There wasn't a problem with the character before. We didn't have this issue. Even I've got a very good friend who's disabled, and he was absolutely disgusted with that Davros skit. And I think that just set the ball rolling a little bit of what are we getting ourselves in for? I think that's the feeling we got after that.
The thing, I think the thing that got our alarm bells ringing as well, Bob, it wasn't necessarily what was on screen, because I think had they presented us with a Davros that we'd, way earlier in his life than we'd ever seen him before, walking around prior to an accident or whatever, we probably would never have given it a passing thought afterwards, because Doctor Who is a time travel show. But it's the common occurrence now that we see whereby a writer or an actor takes part in some sort of supplementary material, whatever it is, promotional work, where they spend 10 minutes selling us about why it must be like this, and browbeating us with, if not necessarily their version, how they view the series now, but a set of very precise beliefs that they have. And if you feel differently, tough. That's the general gist of it. And it's a very prescriptive way that, in particular, but not exclusively the BBC, broadcast pretty much all of their content now. And it's one thing to do that with post-watershed content, but another completely to take a show like Doctor Who, which, yes, it's had certainly themes and ideas and would touch on certain topics in line with whatever was in the news or were conventions of society at a given time. It's an excellent sort of parallel timeline to real world events. You've got that going on, but it had never been so definitive before, so judgmental and so instructional. And I think that tone was immediately very apparent, yes, from that minisode, and then carried through into the bulk of the series. To older fans, it's like hearing an air raid warden sort of siren going off constantly across the soundtrack of each episode. Do you think that's different depending on your age group, or do younger people hear that as well and know something doesn't sound quite right?
Well, what I would say is that, watching, so like, it's interesting because, like, being a Doctor Who fan puts you in an interesting position. So, I work for an organization which is largely stereotyped as, trad-based conservative guy debates, like, liberal pink-haired college students. But then, like, you go to conventions and then, like, you're enjoying the same actors, engaging in the same media, buying the same content. And, media brings people together across different ideas. I'm a large advocate that politics and writers' own political and personal opinions shouldn't really be simmered that deeply into your own media. Of course, you cannot be unbiased. That's a phony term promoted at the BBC so they can take your money. However, media is like your taste buds, right? Like, I can't shout at you on why you should prefer strawberry ice cream over chocolate ice cream. And in the same way, if we go towards the interview with Russell T Davies on the mini episode, him just speaking down towards this thing that no one was thinking about in their head. And this is what I see with the progressive left. And it comes from this, like, historical Marxist way of reading history of we must, in the most extreme way possible, progress in every single aspect of human life, because they understand that progression is always going to be related to, the future being as utopian as humanly possible. So when we have writers coming down, and especially in the way that he came down as a writer of a nearly dead show and said, I'm going to save this show and you're going to listen to the way that I'm going to direct the show because I know better than anyone else. And you're doing it in a political context, it largely turns off new potential viewers and already old established viewers who just wanted consistency from his writing on the 9th and 10th incarnation of the show. But it goes back to the same problem of, like, I wouldn't mind if Doctor Who is majorly left-wing, as well, as long as it's written well. So, for example, I think Davros being, if it is true, if his contextualization of history that disabled people being evil is somehow related to one another because we're ableist in the past, write on that, make it interesting. Especially given that Davros in his early life was a warmongering supremacist. Like, surely there's some writing material there instead of just rechanging history. If you want to have a, like, discussion on social justice, make it interesting. If the Doctor's gay, write about it, because largely I'm not inoffensive to watching material that on an ideological level I will always go against, as long as it's written well.
That's how I've always largely felt about consuming any media, and particularly in the original Russell T Davies era, Charlotte. A lot of those things were present, but no, they weren't sort of baked into the center of it, weren't they? And sort of shouted about all the time. You could take that stuff or leave it.
Yeah, like, one of my favorite Russell episodes from that first run is Turn Left, and you cannot deny that episode has got a lot of political, has got a lot of sort of social issues packed into it. But it's like we've said and Bob just said, we're not gonna, there's this misnomer that as soon as we see that, we hate it. No, we're not like that as fans. We want to have good episodes dealing with that. And with Turn Left, you had the idea of if because of Donna's choice, the world changed and all these little things changed. And it was to do with housing. There was stuff to do with sort of immigration. Nowadays, you'd sort of have that allegory. And one of my favourite moments is when Wilf is seeing a family be packed into the van that they've been staying in the house of. And it's one line of dialogue, but it's beautiful. And it says so much with just one bit of dialogue. And he just turns and he says, that's what they said the last time. When they say, oh, we're just going on holiday, the family. And you know exactly what Russell's talking about. You know exactly what he's pointing to. But it's done with skill. And it's done with that sort of fine touch. It wasn't a diatribe. It wasn't a whole speech Wilf gave. And of course, if you know that character, you know he fought in the war. So he knows exactly what he's talking about with that line. So that's an example of Russell doing it right back in the day.
Yeah, and
What
like
Go on.
I was just gonna say on that moment from Turn Left, like I was so young when I first watched that episode that I didn't even know what that is. And what's good with his writing is that when you get older or when you watch it for the second time, even if someone didn't pick it up because they're not so historically literate, you begin to put the pieces together on what that actually means. And then you actually think about it. And that's the effect of subtle writing. And let's compare, like, let's say he wrote the episode with Shooty Gatwa in mind. He would probably have Shooty like go on a long tangent, probably crying halfway through, of how this is like a symbolism of like 1940s Germany and how they sent people to camps. However, it is so more powerful to leave your audience to come to the same conclusion that the Doctor would have, for example.
When I look at my history of watching this show, Bob, I see a series which has meant all sorts of different things to me at different points in my life, whether it was literally as a kid, whether it was when it was as a teenager, when it was off. They're taking it off, believe it or not. And then when it came back and I was a young father. And here in 2022, 2023, as it was, getting geared up to what I thought stood a chance of being not necessarily a drastic reinvention, because it was curious that an old showrunner was returning. I was still pretty hopeful about that. But I do believe that there is life in the format yet, that it still has legs, it still has viability. But only if people understand what it is, how it works, recognize the conventions, and are, I suppose, most importantly, hyped. They want to be there. And at the moment, it does feel like the people who are aware of Doctor Who, who've hung in there, like football supporters at a club that's been relegated like 4 years on the trot. We feel like we've done an extended time with the series flat on its back. We keep willing it to stand up straight again, and yet it can't seem to do that. And the entire time that it's down, it's losing more and more people. And it's very lifeblood of new children coming in. Just as one set of kids becomes slightly too old and maybe too cynical and starts to take themselves a little too seriously, to really want to invest in it, a new bunch of kids find the show, and that sense of wonder is sort of restored. And some of those older brothers and sisters, they get something out of seeing the younger ones so wrapped up in it. And that's why it brings people together, or brought people together in the way that it did. And yet now it seems to be used to divide people. I feel that it's been weaponized by the BBC itself in their campaign against the British people.
Yeah, like it's unfortunate because I've been working in right-wing politics for the longest amount of time, and the most unexpected thing I was ever going to see when I have my own social media feed, because I have two, one for my private life and another for work, because of course posting is one of the things that contributes to your career. And one of the things I didn't expect to see come last year was, political commentators talking about Doctor Who, just because it's like completely unexpected. And this political football started from the left by using it to convey its opinions. Now, Doctor Who is a child show. If you want to embed like certain ideas that everyone can get behind, like in terms of, even when Russell, he have said on several interviews that there are some issues that he used to discuss previously writing for the modern era. So like he would talk about in small quantities, like climate change, for example. Now, most people can agree, don't tell your child to litter, makes the place a bit bad. However, he said coming out into the 14th and 15th, he could really start pushing his ideas. And once he began to notice that it was more viable to be more aggressive with the messages that he was baking into the show, it kind of wound up that political football. So both sides could use it, because when it comes to a cultural institution like Doctor Who, every political commentator has something to benefit by commentating on the fact that it's slowly dying, because Doctor Who, by and large, reflects the direction of the country, because it reflects the direction of the BBC. When it was booted off air, it demonstrated the change of direction at the BBC at the time. And even now, Disney talked about how the reason why they're ending their contract is because MAGA Republican style America isn't compatible with Doctor Who. So it's no longer viable to use Disney to front it to a global audience. So it's unfortunate that a show that should have largely been promoted to kids as a sort of family asset has now been largely reduced down to what is reflected of a political movement, which is entirely irrelevant. I think, the Doctor is a stoic figure, and, I'm a devout Christian. I see many of what a Christ-like figure is in the Doctor, a figure who's kind of outside of these sort of conflicts and kind of moves with other people to direct them in the right path. So, the Doctor as a character should largely stay out of politics. It should be a language that he doesn't bother worth speaking about.
Yeah, I think when Moffat years and years ago gave that interview and he said the Doctor should be for people on the left, should be for the people on the right, it should be for everybody, he was talking to that the problem is, and it's not just Russell, I feel like Chibnall did this and a little bit Moffat himself, but the more and more I've come to the conclusion, I think that was BBC interfering with some of the later stuff with Capaldi. It's this idea that the Doctor has to be a label. The Doctor has to represent a group, has to sort of be the face of certain... And it's like, no, the Doctor should just be this, like you said, an outsider. I've always seen the Doctor as... They should be this odd sort of... a little bit of a rebellious streak in them, but that's more just because they want to help people. And I think the more you try and force the Doctor into there for this group, you lose the common qualities that we all love about the character. Because you're so focused on this group and this group and this group. And that's sort of, I think, why the character and the show has sort of suffered for multiple years at this point, I think.
Something dawned on me the other day, and it lines up with what you just said, Charlotte. In that the character now doesn't feel like an inheritance that is up for grabs for the country's either its best and brightest character actor or an up-and-coming character actor that no one's ever heard of, who's the latest sort of glove fit, and it will make their career. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Now it seems to be either for somebody to inherit the mantle in the way that a poet laureate would. They tend to award those kind of posts to people who reflect a demographic that they feel need to be given a voice through that posting. And I think the Doctor Who is getting like that. It's almost like the character is an ambassador to the point where it's all on the surface rather than whether the actor is actually suitable for the part yet. I'm always amazed that it manages to reach anyone anymore who's, say, under 25. But it did reach you, Bob. I mean, how did you find it? Where did you first see it?
Well, like I mostly found it through my family. You know, my bigger brother was a large and huge fan of Doctor Who, and then just like slowly, when I was like 5, I think we went to the Doctor Who experience up in Cardiff, and it just was this staple within my life. I found, and back to what you said about casting. I largely felt that Doctor Who's casting of previous iterations kind of reflects the way they was casting people in Harry Potter for the first few movies. Like, it was this very small, exclusively British figure that no one's really heard about that would make their career. And it's because, you know, it almost gives the character a degree of being stoic. Like, no one knows who this man really is going to be. But with Ncuti, there's so much privilege in the fact that he's an already established character. He doesn't feel like there's an obligation to contribute to the figure too much, because if if you look at the interviews with him on why he departed, it just wasn't his role. It didn't fit him. He was largely exhausted from all the work he had to do. But for a new up and coming actor, they know that it'll break their career. They know that they have to work hard in order to get to the top. And if they don't, not only are they ruining their own career, but they're ruining something that I imagine they already loved. So there was some huge obligations put on some small actors, and they handled it so well that it furthered the show. The actor of the Doctor, was also moving in parallel with the development of the Doctor himself. That it is almost like the shoe always fit when it comes to the actor that inherited the role. But in Ncuti's case, it almost looked like the 14th and the 15th weren't being developed by the actor that was playing it, but rather was just one in the same. Regardless from obviously the appearance and the optics that looked completely different, the 14th and the 15th kind of right in the same way.
Yeah,
I'd not looked at it that way.
I think it's interesting, like you said, about the actors and what they can bring to it. Like, Bob, my favourite Doctor's Matt. Like, I'm a Matt girl. Like, I watched before that, but he's the one who captured my interest the most. And to this day, I sort of have a real emotional attachment, I'm not going to lie, to that Doctor. And I think I almost feel like they thought they could have Matt again a little bit with Ncuti. Like, let's get this young, still quite young in his career. He had done stuff, but he wasn't a major name. But the difference between Matt and Ncuti is that Matt just had more hunger, I think, honestly, for the part. You can see in those interviews, he went and watched the older episodes. You can feel how much he developed and how much he really worked at what he wanted his Doctor to be. He talked about Troughton. He talked about the influence there. And then on screen, you can just see he brought that old man back. And we hadn't had that for so long. And he did feel like a throwback at times. And I feel like just with Ncuti, he just struggled to find the Doctor. He just couldn't get his head in that space to give us a convincing enough performance. Some of that was, I do admit, some of that was probably Russell and people around him, because he said, for example, he wanted to have a set costume, and Russell and the production team basically shot that idea down. And I think for an actor, that's horrible to do to an actor. You should allow them the freedom if they've got a really good idea, or they've got an idea that's going to benefit them. But I feel like, I agree, like with Ncuti, this part never clicked for some reason.
So if he doesn't dress like the Doctor, I do believe that, you know, one of the reasons why you put on that long coat of yours when you go out canvassing there, Bob, is, you know, because you want to cut a certain kind of figure, you want to feel in a certain kind of way. We dress in a way which makes us feel good or fit for the job at hand. And I think Doctor Who is very much like that as well. So Ncuti hadn't got that. But from the more I think about what you've just said about the material, about the 14th and the 15th, the 14th and the 15th Doctors, the more I think that you're right. So if the Doctor isn't within the material and he can't even put on the long coat and do the thing, he hasn't even got that to lean on, then there's not a great deal. I'm not making excuses for Ncuti Gatwa. I do think he was miscast, but he wasn't really armed with anything that was going to aid him in finding the part either. It was somewhat of an uphill battle, perhaps, for any actor.
Yeah, it's also I thought like this modern approach to the fact that he didn't have a set dress, and also the TARDIS as well, being something that could constantly change colors. It was large, it was empty. It didn't stylize his sort of. So Doctor Who was coming off, and let's compare how Ncuti inherited the show towards the way that Matt did. Matt inherited the show where David Tennant was leaving. It was a very much a huge movement within the established audience of Doctor Who because he was always a staple figure within the show. He was the one that was always afforded the sort of right of actually giving the show the momentum that it had at the time. So Matt needed to keep the formula of success that David had, but also differentiate himself in such a way that would make other people invested within the show. And that's why a lot of the promotional material for the next series of the season that started Matt's reign had pictures of both Matt and David, because they wanted to combine both the figure of David but something new in Matt. However, Gatwa inherited a show majorly from the 13th where no one really knew the identity of Doctor Who. It was more this corporate entity that was kind of a dead horse that some people tried to breathe life into it. So he had this sort of like, all right, you have the TARDIS core, that function. You have the Doctor that serves that function. But there was no customization when it comes to what these things are. And you don't see that more in the fact that he doesn't have his own custom wear. He doesn't have his own custom TARDIS. It just seems like this sort of modernization of the TARDIS that has none of its quirky features that so many people always gravitated towards. It was huge, large, empty, could change appearances constantly, and there was no real episodes that really relied on it. So all of the things didn't work, and in fact went in opposition to Gatwa's favor because he couldn't attach himself to anything to continue the show forward. He was a man who was miscast, who was in a weird direction of the show with a director that ultimately shouldn't have returned because it seemed like he had transformed his ideas from the shows that he was doing outside of Doctor Who.
Do you think the series ever stood a chance of recovering from the disastrous casting of Jodie Whittaker?
I don't think Jodie was actually bad. Like, I think it's perfectly fine for the Doctor to be a woman, right? And I'm admitting this whilst also being in a sphere that many would suspect they just don't like the fact that the Doctor was a woman. However, it would have needed to have been written in a really good way. And I think the first episode of the 13th actually, established it quite well. The fact that she just woke up, didn't really know she was a woman, kind of recognized the fact that she used to be a man, and then it continued onwards. And I think that it became stale pretty quickly because the character that she was on the first episode stayed consistent throughout her reign, which is a really bad idea. I think that there should have been added on layers, suspicion of who she actually is, actual discussions surrounding the difficulties of being a woman for the first time, and another surrounding discussion on whether it would have been successful coming out of the reign of Jodie is how you handle Jodie's reign. Because towards the end with the Timeless Child, which is done so terribly, I hate that narrative absolutely, to make us believe that for some reason the Doctor, which is supposed to be an outlier, someone who's weird within his society, is the center of Gallifreyan society, is just completely going against the whole narrative of the show, and there was nothing to build it up to absolutely whatsoever. So the way that I think Russell handled with it was that he accepted that this was a staple of the show, which many people would have already went against.
He made a choice.
Yeah, he made a choice to continue with it, but he didn't really do anything with it. He just said, "Oh, yeah, I am." Had one episode with the 14th crying about it momentarily, and then continued business as usual.
You see, where I see all of that sort of lore stuff, which was so badly made, I believe it could have so easily been sidestepped. In fact, they practically did. And then they seemed to change their minds on it, seemed to go backwards and forwards on it. It seemed to be retconned in the 60th specials, and then it was back, and then it was gone again, then it was back. But when I look at the 13th Doctor's era, which even calling it that sticks in my throat, I loathe it with a passion. when I look at that era and try to be objective about it, I think the real thing that marks it out as different, above even, or certainly the equal of it being a female, an actress playing the part rather than an actor, is it's the very first time that an incarnation of the Doctor has actually degenerated, has regressed, rather than been built on as the actor spends more time in the role and develops it and explores it. This characterization got thinner and thinner the more the era went along. And I think we saw that, and that repeated with Ncuti Gatwa, strangely enough. So you see what I'm saying, Charlotte? That's something I've been playing with for a while.
Well, I'm so happy Bob said about the discussion point, because that did my head in with the 13th Doctor. Like, we had Peter Capaldi, we had an older actor just beforehand, and we had a whole season arc, like a character-driven season arc about am I a good man? And you could see that Doctor was sort of struggling a little bit with having the older face and having sort of a companion that didn't accept him a little bit. So I love those little character developments they did with Capaldi, and that, like, he was a bit darker, so that led into the idea of am I a good man.
See, but the way that veered, that didn't help, but at least it was still moving forward. Well, no, there was still a characterization was driving it, whereas there was something else driving Jodie, and there was something else steering Ncuti as well.
No, but my problem was there, and I'm like, you've just had that with Capaldi, you're a woman for the first time on screen, and for what before we saw the time as child rubbish, you're a woman for the first time. Shouldn't that mean that there's a lot of character work you can do with that idea? If you're going to do it, if you're going to bite the bullet and actually change the Doctor, you've got actually this massive thing you could explore with being a female. And they did nothing. Like, I agree, they completely sort of randomly would bring it up when it suited them in the plot and then do nothing. And I was just like, that's such a wasted opportunity. That you've taken the step, we've accepted, it's on screen, we have to accept it.
See, because my view is that these decisions, Bob, were also made, firstly, paramount importance politically as a massive virtue signal by an unimaginative writer who wasn't secure in his own grasp of the character, and so needed an extra gimmick to lean on in the form of just swapping the gender. And Chibnall pretty much trod water with the Doctor himself for the entire time that he was showrunning the thing.
I think that what you're largely talking about when it comes to characterization is just that with Jodie's and Gatwa's reign, it was that they were largely running off the fumes of what it was already established to be the Doctor. So there was nothing that really drove the characters in terms of characterizations. For Capaldi, it was, am I a good man? He was constantly going throughout his journeys with this common understanding that he suspects that he's somehow doing things out of despite. He was an incredibly evil man, but he was trying to do good in this world. But with Jodie and Gatwa, there was nothing that moved them. It was just that, we're this like commercialized understanding of the Doctor. We're quirky, and that's really it. There's nothing that drives these people at all. Their sort of characterization are conceptually thin. And what had happened with the writing of Chibnall is that he just needed to shoehorn in concepts in order to continue the Doctor's reign. So he would use even like companions like Dan. Like, he wasn't developed at all, and he was just majorly used towards pushing the narrative. Without the Doctor's characterization, you just need really big concepts in order to drive the duration of the show. That's why he brought in stuff like the Flux, like Dan as a new companion halfway through, like the Timeless Child, because he needed concepts to play around with, because he couldn't play with the Doctor, because he didn't know how to write the Doctor.
And if he could lean on the fact that audiences, I believe this happened both with Bradley Walsh and John Bishop, because they were light entertainers, personalities who'd hosted game shows and done this, that, and the other. The audience knew them, and so both of those characters were written as John Bishop and Bradley Walsh, to the point where I can never remember what their characters' names were. So he couldn't even be bothered to do that. I mean, Jodie Whittaker has spoken about her performance, her characterization in just a few interviews. And she said how she realized after a year that she'd been doing it wrong. And you could see that she was trying to impersonate David Tennant. She thought that you flail your arms like this, you pull a few faces. There's a certain way of playing this part. She thought all she'd really got to do was to turn up, to impersonate David Tennant, and then to take the money and piss off home. And I think to some extent, Ncuti Gatwa kind of felt the same as well. Even if he couldn't nail it down to Tennant, okay, this is what they do. Just sort of swagger around a bit, flash the smile, sound as if you know what you're talking about, rather than to build something of his own. You've inherited a mantle. You haven't been gifted a role. This isn't your part. These aren't your shoes that you're walking in. And that's probably why it never worked.
Yeah, I exactly believe that. David Tennant made the show popular. He was the archetype of what it meant to anyone outside of the Doctor Who fandom to be Doctor Who. If you ask any, even Americans who have barely got in contact with the show at all, okay, you say the word Doctor Who do you know? David Tennant. All right. So, if you're getting miscast and you're not really a fan who's connected with the lore of the show, you're just going to think, okay, David Tennant, flamboyant, moves around a lot, over-exaggerated poses, not really being consistent with your emotions, kind of acting like a bit of an alien in a sort of human-esque way. And that is when, because your characterization is conceptually thin, where you have to add other things to the show outside of the Doctor to then continue the show. And if you're an already bad writer, you can't have a good relationship between the new ideas that you want to introduce to the show and the already established lore of the show. When we saw the Timeless Child, and then the show just kind of leans off into this non-linear fantasy world where nothing's consistent, and it is just sort of the imposed fantasies of the writers injected into the show, which we saw with Chris Chibnall, which we saw with Russell T Davies, because they just wanted the show to go in a certain direction for no reason whatsoever, implemented in a very helpless way for no reason whatsoever. And then they told audiences, and this is the one thing you don't do as a director, you tell audiences you want this. This is what you need. In fact, this is better than what anyone else is producing because it's more morally virtuous. And that's when you lose people. You play around with what people already like about the Doctor. You don't add anything new. And the things that you do add that actually are bad for the show, you then, kind of talk down to the audience in terms of why you should like it.
I also think
Well, I was wondering. Go on, Charles.
I was just going to say, I think another factor, we've talked a lot about the Doctor, which is right, because they are the main figure of the show. Also, I think we've had a couple of showrunners who don't understand we need scary monsters. We need villains that are actually to scare, you can go, oh, how's the Doctor going to defeat them this time? We need that level of danger, and I feel the show has completely lost that for the last couple of runs. I can't think of a single episode where there's been a really sort of something that stuck with me monster-wise or creature-wise or villain-wise when I'm like, oh, they're cold, they're horrible sort of feeling.
Given the fact that the series is in such a state, Bob, and I certainly get the distinct impression that a great many people, even of your age, have no real affinity or connection with it anymore. So given that it has lost its audience, were you surprised when they announced a new special for next Christmas? Do you think the prudent thing would have been to lick your wounds, to go away and stay away for an extended period of time? And do you think what are your hopes for that special in just over a year's time? Do you think it stands a chance of making any mark, of turning anything around? Is there any remote appetite left for the show? And can a year make a difference?
I think the appetite's still there, but it's for a very bad reason. Like I said, the show is a political football. The sort of appetite would just be in the fact that they got Billie Piper back. That's obviously something that was shoehorned in towards the very end of reshooting the show. It was made very obvious by the actors that were involved in that filming that it might not even come back. So it doesn't really matter. It's mostly done by a favor to Billy Piper, to Russell T Davies. So my suspicion is that there will be a lot of people watching that special. However, I do not know what the direction of the special is going to be. If it is of this sort of reminiscence of nostalgia, I think it's going to do absolutely poorly, because you already had that with the 14th Doctor, and you've sort of sandwiched in. And this is why I would never blame anyone at Bad Wolf or Ncuti Gatwa himself, because they have the unfortunate pleasure of being sandwiched in between 2 episodes of nostalgia with Billy Piper and David Tennant. So it's extremely unfortunate that something that was actually new was sort of in between 2 things that we're trying to use to transition the show into something better. However, I think that after this episode, if it isn't set up, and it depends on how it's set up towards the end, if it's we already have an established Doctor, that either Billy Piper herself or a new Doctor, if we don't already have a plot that is going to drive the next series, which we sort of saw with the Toymaker going into the 15th. However, if we don't have a similar thing that actually interests viewers, if we don't have a TARDIS set up, if we don't have all of these things set up, that what does the next era of Doctor Who look like? And it's just, oh, she regenerates into someone else new, then there's a cliffhanger. I don't think you're going to invest viewers anything. Or even if like you just announced that Russell T Davies will be continuing writing the show, no one's going to be interested at all. You would need to set up the Christmas special to be a transition out of the 3 writers that have been a staple in the show into something new, which has a story that people can actually get behind.
Is that the number one priority, do you think, if Doctor Who is to have any kind of future at all, to slip the grip of not necessarily personally just Russell T Davies, but a certain group of people who are all interconnected, who are all very powerful, influential, but ultimately exhausted, dry of any real creativity, and only are capable of using the show either as that political football or as a weapon of some sort?
I have no idea why he would decide to cast. And I think that Doctor Who, even in the second series, would have been completely viable to continue if it hadn't decided to cast the next Doctor as Billy Piper or whatever she is, like a conduit or whatever. So, like, I think it would have been more viable just to continue the show onwards and see if you could direct it in a way that more people respond well to. However, because they've done something that already seems like the writers are exhausted of the show, there's going to be no expectations towards the performance going forward of the show. So it just seems like it's a desperation of Russell to reenact some sort of nostalgia to get the old established audience back into the show. And if it fails come the festive season in 2026, I see no reason why the show could continue, because a year break isn't anything new to Modern Who. And it is nothing like we're going to take a break, freeze the show for a while, actually rethink what the show needs. That's no time whatsoever to actually critically rethink what the show was missing in order for it to be successful.
Just last week, he told the Radio Times, "I know exactly what happens in it. Don't worry about that." Should we take this advice, Bob, and not worry? Do you trust him? But would you buy a used car from this man? Would you buy a used TV show from this man?
I would buy a used car from him because, like, he is honest. He will just flat out sell to you, like, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna put this in my show. Like, I will just like talk about social justice on your show." Like, I do feel like, and the way he used the word going into the 14th, like, yeah, like we have more free reign to talk about the things that I want to talk about in this show. So yeah, I would buy a used car from him because you know what to expect, and that's the worst thing with a writer. You shouldn't know what to expect. And
see, I used to really respect him, Bob. I did, but now I find him to be disingenuous. Do I think he's dishonest? I'm not sure, Charlotte. I can't quite figure it out, but I think he's disingenuous.
I think Russell forgets what he said himself half the time. He will say a statement, and then later on down the line, it's like a completely different person is speaking. We've all said this on our live shows. At times, you can't believe Russell is the same person because of how he flip-flops, how one thing is so certain and then it's something else. But I think also the Billy casting, I think that has made it so hard for, if they've got an actor after her, whoever, like, coming into it after Billy, you're coming off a massive PR stunt, you're coming off a massive sort of, like, the most in-your-face nostalgia bait thing ever. So you're coming off that as an actor. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of actors right now are sort of, if they got offered this role, they'd sort of be thinking, should I take it after the current state the show's in? I wouldn't be half surprised. And I think that's the thing, we need whoever's next, and I agree, it needs to have a definite ending. I've said this. We cannot have Billy burst into flames and it turned to black. That would be the worst
inheriting
thing they could do.
Well, taking the role of the Doctor did used to be an almost guaranteed main line to the heart of certainly the nation, if not a global audience at that point. And that's just simply no longer the case. I mean, Kate Phillips, who's head of content for BBC, recently said at the Edinburgh TV Festival that the TARDIS is going nowhere. They intend on commissioning another series at some point in the nearish future, we think. We've heard rough ideas of what they intend on doing over the next 3 years, because Bad Wolf has this for an extended period of time. But whether it actually comes to pass, who knows? Time for a break, I think. Yes, I think we talked for quite a long time here in the cluster room with our guest, the debater, the content creator and youth ambassador for Turning Point UK, young Bob here. We know that people have been posting questions and comments in the live chat, so we'll go and connect with that in a moment. But before we do, let's get some golden faces and golden voices from the other end of the vortex. There is the Type 40 Live Doctor Who ad break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Closer, my friends. Behold the face of destiny. Now spin your Cadbury's cream egg with me and discover how will you eat yours. 1, eat your egg slice. 2, find the star and lick it off. 3, eat it whole in 1. 4, spin some more. 5, give your egg a good licking. I've seen the future. And it's egg safe!
How will you eat yours?
We love you! Give us a cuddle!
Oh, I couldn't wear this. It's far too revealing.
Yes. Cut it off, cut it all off.
I tell you what, love, let's ask your mother around this weekend. We haven't seen her in ages.
Have a break. Have a Kit Kat.
Peace and love!
Yeah, Rover 600, automatic. Nightfire red. 14 months old. Leather seats, beige to match the interior. Yes, we've got one. Has it got the walnut dash?
At Rover dealers, we believe you should have the same choice of used cars as new ones, which is why every dealer has access to thousands of quality-checked used Rovers.
Yeah, what's this about you writing off CJ's Rover?
Including just the one you need.
We're back with more Type 40 Live on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook and X here. The past, the present and the future of Doctor Who. It is all our plaything, everybody. We've been putting the vortex to rights here with our guest speaker, debater, content creator, young Bob. Are we close to fixing it? Well, sort of. We get it the right way up. Maybe in the remaining time that we have. I don't know. So we're back here on the panel. Hope you enjoyed the ads as much as we did. Any of those bring back any memories for you, Bob? I think you could be too young Bob. Did you ever see any of those before?
Yeah, I was born in 2008, so I imagine not. I don't know when those adverts were dated. So
don't rub it in. We had a good mixture. There. How about you, Charlotte?
He's used to it now, Bob.
Oh, dear me. So what they call a senior moment, isn't it? What year is it again? I don't know. Yes, so we've had some questions and some comments. I'm happy to say they haven't just been sat there blowing smoke. Not this time anyway. So let's see what people have got to say about our conversation. We've got, first of all, peace and love. Give us a cuddle, says Funky there watching on YouTube. Obviously enjoyed the adverts. Okay, we've got these comments. Okay. Domgo says, age has nothing to do with it. I saw a mum and an 9-year-old daughter in HMV when the Ruby Road DVD came out. And the mum asked the daughter, would you like that? And the girl said, no, that's rubbish.
Yeah, I think that the show is not gravitating towards a younger audience because young people are majorly, like, a lot of people on the right like to think that a lot of young people are like left-wing progressives. However, young people that are into politics are like that. Young people who don't know anything about politics, they don't really care. They don't really care what sort of values their content are pushing as long as it's something that they're interested in. And that's with most children, really. I mean, if you go to this underdeveloped understanding that you get when you're like 5 or 4, there's a reason why like the tablet generation is literally whatever can give me my dopamine rush, because children just respond well to what is good for them. So if you have like, with the sort of narrative of Ruby about who are her parents just turn out to be a regular single mum, but like children don't care. Children want elaborate narratives that they can kind of grit their teeth into, and if they don't get that with a show, they're not going to respond well to it. And that's the problem. Russell T Davies thinks that he's some sort of pioneer of this cultural and social justice movement, with the younger generation sort of being their crusaders that he has under his control. However, he needs to understand that there is only such a small fringe amount of people that ultimately agree and enjoy the content that he writes outside of Doctor Who. So he's, although going to get a consistent fan base, he's already going to get a small one.
That was the case to some extent the best part of 30 years ago when he first started out. He did have that impact. He did have his finger on the pulse of the nation, but it certainly isn't the case now. I mean, I was wondering, funnily enough, is this a frustration that commonly institutions such as the BBC and characters who represent them, like Russell T Davies, that they do think that all young people, anybody, for example, in your case, under 20, automatically thinks is just very hive-minded in the way that he and his friends are?
Yeah, absolutely. It is literally just like, they believe that all of these young people are sort of political activists. So the Doctor being gay is going to move them an inch, when ultimately most young people don't really care about identity politics. It's something that's largely saturated culturally, and it's something that most people would mock. And there are a small fringe of young people, most people who are young, who are political, think the same way that Russell does. However, they, because they are focusing on about social justice, believe that because what they're trying to discuss is something that in their eyes is so important that everyone must automatically get behind. The Doctor being labeled as a oppressed minority, for example, is something that instantly people have to get behind, when ultimately people just care about the way it's written, right? Like I remember, yeah. It's like I remember with Rogue. I remember with Rogue, like, I didn't really care that the Doctor was homosexual. I know that was something that was largely teased. However, the fact of the matter is...
You call that teasing? God,
yeah. It's like, you just largely, like, if it was pushed in a way where the Doctor was in a bit of an identity crisis, he had been a man, he'd been a woman. However, he's always gravitated towards women as someone he loved. He was already married, and this is not... None of this was brought up when it comes to the fact that he had a male lover. So, like, I was an ex-drama student, as I mentioned before. I just thought that the way they wrote it, the way that the two actors engaged with it was incredibly conceptually thin. And I think that, Russell, he lives in a chamber of yes men, and he needs to get out of that in order to write something that's successful.
Yeah, I can just add from my experience, when I first watched it, I was a young girl. Like, I was that... And I think you could tell when in 2005 they were aware that they wanted to try and get some more girls into the show. You can't deny that with the way how Rose was written. how she was the central character. But what he did so well with Rose is he made her this fully rounded, even from the first episode, or maybe not fully rounded, but there was enough there that that as a young girl, I could sort of see in her. That I could sort of go, I get that. Like, I can understand her where she's coming from.
Charlotte, it was all measured beautifully, and he knew exactly. His instincts were absolutely right 20 years ago in a way that they're simply not now. We've got some more comments here. Like we've got, I agree with young Bob on all of this stuff he's saying now. He's very clever, isn't he? That's from Chris Chatfield watching on YouTube. And TARDIS 1963 says Russell T Davies saying everything, and everyone agrees with me, which is what you were just saying there, Bob, was a total red flag for me. I immediately thought we are in trouble here. And Fly Highland says, oh my God, it's young Bob. No way. Lots of exclamation marks. Could be a bit of a fan there, as is Dark Place, who says, howdy, young Bob. I've been following for years. Yourself, Bob the Builder, and other Speaker's Corner orators. Bob the Builder, is this a friend of yours?
Yeah, so a bit of a backstory here. So, like, we live in a surveillance state. If someone knows your face, they know your name. But starting out, I didn't know that. So I was like, I want a stage name. And Speaker's Corner, if anyone doesn't know, is this sort of marketplace for anyone to sort of debate, get a ladder, speak, preach, talk about any political or religious issues. And one of the biggest figures within the Christian sphere for preaching, evangelism, apologetics, and polemics is a guy called Bob. Now, the first debate I did got many cameras involved because a lot of people film the debates at Speaker's Corner, partially because a lot of them are grifters, partially because people want to promote the ideas that some of the speakers are kind of speaking on. And one of the more vocal cameramen who gives a lot of commentary when it comes to filming, he saw me speaking in such a way that it reminded him of Bob. Now, I just think he was racist because he just saw two white guys and thought they looked the same. However, that's where I got the name Young Bob, because the guy called Bob at Speaker's Corner, who, funny enough, got his name because someone randomly in an audience called him Bob. That's apparently a younger version of him. And from then on, everyone just assumes that I'm his son, which is not the case, by the way, which is extremely annoying.
And McConter says, blimey, December already, Charlotte. Hello, everyone. Delighted to see young Bob as a guest on here. And the Zero Room, also on YouTube, says the political division is too great and unhealthy for all. Got to work together. Okay, I'm done. He's spent. He's out. Yeah, this is something that we do worry about. And this is, generally speaking, this is a problem that we've got in every section of society rather than just our entertainment, is that the divides between people, the atomization that I was talking about, it is incredibly unhealthy. And people are getting their interpersonal skills, the powers of empathy, all of it is leaving us, I feel, as a nation, certainly, if not as a race. And I think that's... Obviously, that has to be a bad thing, and I'm not sure how to go about changing it. Sean, I mean, should we? The easy thing to do is just to blame smartphones, because that's the focus of our attention.
The thing that's so sad, and I think you're right, it's across the board, is the idea that people can have different opinions and still be friends. Like, that's what I feel like is losing, and it's like, for example, at the weekend, like, Sarah went to see the Wicked movie and I'd already seen it and we had a chat about it. Some stuff she really liked about it and some of that stuff I didn't like as much, and vice versa. Like, we proper talked about the pros and cons of it, and afterwards we were laughing and joking, and it's just that the idea that we can all see things a bit different, we all react differently to certain things, and that's sort of, but like you said, and Bob has been talking about, the problem is because other things have been so tribalized now and everybody's sort of been pitted a bit against each other, that that ability just to agree to disagree is sort of becoming seen as a bad thing, which is sad and shouldn't really be. It should be the opposite of that.
People are very proud about the fact that they can't agree to disagree. No, I'm so sure of my convictions, I cannot agree to disagree. I will not consider a compromise. Like, whoa. We have a ringer in the live chat in the form of Darren Bradley. Lemon cough syrup in the pocket helps the voice box for those prolonged outdoor discussions. You can have that one for free on us, young Bob. There you go. It was worth turning up after all.
Yeah, I was on Talk TV because it seems like they regularly ask me on there, and like we were discussing about something, and like I've had this terrible cold, which personally I haven't done anything in terms of taking medicine to help it, but like my voice was like dead, so halfway through my voice just completely plateaued, and it was terribly because I just continued regardless, but like a lot of the producers behind the glass just obviously is like, what is this guy doing? Like, please just ask for a glass of water for the sake of our sanity. But yeah, I appreciate the medical advice.
Domgo says the Doctor moved from being a Christ-like figure to an "Oh Christ" figure. I see what you did there, Domgo. Very good, very good. And 70mm says, "Holy shit, young pin Bob." Another Bob fan, Bob, for the fan club there.
Yeah, well, it's like my friend described it quite well because he saw me start out at Speaker's Corner, which is largely for religious zealots. And then I started, dabbling in the political world. And then I started dabbling into like being a political commentator. So it's like people just randomly see me in things. Like I'm assuming for the people who have watched me here, they must think it's bizarre for me to be on a show that traditionally just talks about Doctor Who. So, I like just talking about anything that I'm really interested in. And that always causes for some interesting interactions.
Well, we've enjoyed it so far. Certainly. Thank you so much for your time. Lord Thoth says here, it truly breaks my heart at what has happened to this show, which I know is back to more serious. And this is the way a great deal of our audience feel, Bob. This is the podcast and the live stream. People feel desolate at the loss and the damage of this series. That's aside from it being a cultural institution and all those things. It's that we love that character and we love the show the way it made us feel. And now it just makes us feel increasingly barren of the things of hope and community and that feeling that you could sort of rise above adversity and a real sense of inclusivity. It oddly feels more exclusive than ever. And this is what pushes people like Lord Thoth to say, my heart is broken by this show. I mean, what would you say to that sentiment?
I would say that, and this goes more towards the other questions that were asked today as well, is that it's like politicizing a show or introducing tribalism to a show is almost like adverts before the goods. You're hoping that if you traverse throughout, the adverts and this analogy, that you finally get the thing that you wanted in the first place. And for many people, the same thing is true with going into Russell T Davies's new reign, is that, we're hoping that come out of all of the dramas that he was producing, all of the poor writing directions he was going, that towards the end, the finale of each season that he wrote, something good would have happened from the show. It would have been something that they recognized as the Doctor Who that they loved. And this speaks to, more broadly speaking, how people perceive shows in their lives, especially such an animated figure than the Doctor. Like we said before, the Doctor has no labels. He is no one, but is for everyone. And, when you go through adversities, when this institution is so old and throughout your life, you may be down a particular day, you can use the show as a way of grounding yourself, enjoying a bit of entertainment. But when that's blocked through what's currently going on with the show, people just get upset. And what I would say towards those that feel barren and really downtrodden by the way that the show is going is keep to that, because as long as you keep to an emotional response and you just don't completely detach yourself from the show, people will have interests in it, and hopefully at some point you can claim victory and you can say that this is the show that you once remembered.
We've got a comment here from Chris Chatfield who says Jodie Whittaker was great. I met her for real in 2022. A beautiful lady, a very pretty lady. She's not Doctor Who though, is she? I'm glad you had a good time meeting Jodie. Chris, of course, I don't begrudge anybody a good time meeting their hero. Domgo says it's simple. Russell T Davies wanted the Doctor to be a camp gay black man, so he cast a camp gay black man. I mean, is it that simple? Was he just simply cast a type? They were never. I mean, we did say on this show, because we've been doing this for a long time, and we said there is no way they're going to cast anybody but a black man in this role. We knew exactly which demographic he was going to be. I mean, not so much the gay side. I'm still not sure what Ncuti's sexual orientation is. It's not something I've ever looked into. How he classifies himself, to me, that's irrelevant. The character is the character. We never knew actors' sexual orientations when I was a kid, so it's never so much of a thing. But I think we all knew that he would be a black man between the ages of 30 and 32, maybe, and that he would probably be quite good looking and would be sort of more, I think we imagined, traditionally capable. And I think Ncuti was physically capable. They just never really gave him opportunity to show it. But at the time, we were told we were being cynical, coming to that conclusion. But it does seem that they just simply had all these boxes. I know it's a cliche, Bob, but the whole thing about box ticking, it does seem that that's how this part is cast now.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways you could take this sort of joke that, it's either what Russell wants in a man and he just wanted to work with someone like that, or he was just working off this stereotype of let's tick all the boxes. And I have seen some certainly crude jokes on places, especially like X. And
you won't find dirty jokes on here, mate. We don't do any of that stuff, do we, Charlotte? No smut.
Of course, Dan.
But yeah, I think that by and large, just because I think Russell T Davies is so delusional to believe that this is what people want and this is the sign of change. A sign of change is good writing and a good show. It's not who you cast within the shoe of the Doctor. I mean, we've been largely talking about, is there an opportunity to miscast someone as the Doctor? But I would say that there is a nuanced opinion when it comes to the art of casting. It is up to the person who is being cast within the character and also the ability of the writer. Now, let's say we do get a gay camp black guy as the Doctor, defeating social norms, as many would have put it on social media. And, Russell T Davies didn't just use that as the main gravity of what the Doctor, that iteration of the Doctor is, and actually made the Doctor an interesting character that had an interesting story, that actually fought with a lot of the things that made him different from other iterations. That would have been way more interesting than just saying, hey, I'm loud, I'm proud, I'm queer, and you're just going to accept this now. This has always been me. I may have had a wife before in the past. I may have always liked women in the past. However, we can largely just reshape history and act like this has always been the complete norm.
We've got a comment here asking from Matthew. This is from Matthew Jones on Matthew Jones Saves Grogu. On YouTube. What? Okay. It says, can Russell T Davies be trusted to clean up his own mess and introduce a new Doctor that people will recognize as the Doctor? To sort of, I think that's an appeal to the idea of returning the characters sort of to a kind of factory settings, isn't it, Charlotte? It's okay. We've had that experimentation that Bob was just sort of pointing to there, and it hasn't worked. We failed in our task. I mean, I firmly believe Russell will not be involved in the casting of the next Doctor. But however the Doctor sort of reappears, remanifests, can any of them be trusted? Can the BBC be trusted to bring us a version of that character anymore? That's what I wonder, Charlotte, because the old guard, the creative people who just cared about casting the right person for the part, that seems to be a rare mindset to find, particularly at the BBC.
I think the underlying issue I think Russell's had with all of his free castings, because I'm including Billy in that, is he's had a very small scope for who he looks for. He's gone to either people he's worked with in the past or with Ncuti. The more you saw of his performance and the more you actually saw of the writing of his Doctor, the more you thought, you're writing something you're very comfortable with here. So I would be surprised if you cast somebody you're very comfortable with all those ideas of what you and Bob were just talking about. And I think when you're so restricted into who you want as the Doctor or who you see as the Doctor, then you're not going to get a diamond in a rough. You're not going to get, like in classic terms, a Tom Baker, who comes out of nowhere and just blows everybody away. You're not going to get a Matt again because Moffat has spoken about this. He had in his head an older actor even at that point. But Matt came in and absolutely blew them all away with his audition. And he went, right, we found him. And I think Russell, he's not willing to take chances now in casting. He's not willing to open himself to the whole array of actors in this country we have at this moment. Either small character actors or bigger actors. And I think whoever's next needs to sort of be somebody who can grab this part with two hands, have a real idea and a passion and a drive, and go, I'm the Doctor. That's what we've been missing, I think, pretty much since Capaldi, sadly.
We've got a comment here from TARDIS 1963 who says, me again, just look at season 13. Tom Baker just released on Blu-ray a better, more consistent run of Doctor Who you couldn't wish for, and no returning monsters. Hinchcliffe Holmes was the best era for Doctor Who. How steeped in the classic show are you, Bob? Is this something that you've seen a lot of? Have you got a favourite in respect to that?
Well, you know, to admit there's a large disconnect between me and old shows, probably an understatement. But, you know, I think more of the audiobooks of the older Doctors have something that I've more come to appreciate.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, yeah, because, you know, they're still the old Doctors, but they've been written for a more modern audience. And that was what I was going to go towards. Like, if they just want to, like, recast the same people, why don't you just, like, have a spin-off, or you have the main direction of Doctor Who just be on old Doctors that you continue their story with? I mean, especially with Jodie, it would be interesting to see if you could go back and fix some of the gaping holes when it comes to her arc, and potentially be the sort of fix when it comes to how you continue the show onwards, which you can do through audiobooks, or you can just do through spin-offs, or you could just do through, instead of, you know, relying on these people who are like James Gunn just recasting the same people, you know, you can just play with the people that are already established.
Nobody established themselves more in the part than Tom Baker. Well, I say nobody. I'd say that you're actually right about David Tennant as well. I think that incarnation was, still sort of is, standout. I think that he has, again, kind of damaged his legacy, or Russell has. I'm not quite sure who should take most responsibility. Probably should be Russell, come to think of it. Should David Tennant have come back, Bob?
I think he would have had to. Here's the thing. I just don't trust David Tennant as an actor either myself. I think that he's had this sort of comfort in his life to be like a political activist and talk about politics, which an actor should never do. An actor,
it's very unedifying.
If you're in the industry of selling yourself, and not in a particular way of being in a trade, giving some sort of physical exchange, but just I am myself on screen, you have to be completely separate from the things that people hate politicians for doing. Like, you're literally looking at a scene where, you know, everyone in politics has their haters en masse. And then you've got celebrities which are supposed to be adored and loved by everyone. They're supposed to sell themselves as the real VIPs of this world. And then, like, as a VIP, as someone in this like high horse, you're just looking down at these politicians who are incredibly hated. And you say, yeah, let's have a piece of that. You have to be a certain type of delusional in order to pick up that mantle of being political. So I just don't trust David Tennant, if he was presented with this role, to do it properly and continue at a state in his life where he couldn't really afford to mess up Doctor Who, not for just the sake of the show, because of course the ninth incarnation had a very, and I would call it a conspiratorial sudden leave of the show. So I just didn't trust him. I would have just said no. I'd have brought someone like Matt back.
Oh, no argument here, Charlotte, right?
Oh, definitely not. Yeah, and I think just to add to what Bob was saying, when an actor is so loud with their views in interviews and other stuff, and especially if you're really abrasive, like Tennant has been and Ncuti was and Jodie, all in their initial sort of press junkets and interviews they did, it's hard to not hear that stuff when you watch them on screen. I think it's getting increasingly hard for actors for you to just leave all that baggage and go, no, they're playing this character now on screen. That's why I think the actors who disappear in between roles, or the actors, if they do press, don't, like you say, talk about personal stuff as much unless it makes sense for the project they're doing. You can then see them as their characters more, I think. And I think that's whoever's next casting, if they don't give them the biggest media training going into this role to be like, here's what all the past versions have done, please don't do that. Don't annoy the fans before they've watched a single episode. Don't tell them to touch grass. Don't do those comments.
Do you think Doctor Who belongs on television in 2026, 2027, 29, 30, Bob, or does it just need to take that extended period of rest for it to have any kind of viability again, or to reach another generation?
It's not the time, it's just the people at the BBC. Like, if they would largely just give free reign to new and up-and-coming writers and actors, I would say sure. I never think it's the time. I think there's always an appetite for Doctor Who. I just think it's the people that are managing it and the direction that they envision themselves for. Especially if you want to go down this political route, it means that people are largely no one thinks that politics is like genuine anymore. No one sees any politician as authentic. So if you want to place Doctor Who as this sort of almost like how they initially had with the first Doctor being like a history lesson, if you want Doctor Who to be a lesson on politics, no one's going to give it any trust, legitimacy, or authenticity.
Absolutely right. It's not what they go to the show for, and it's part of why we find ourselves in the situation that we are, because they've turned up with a full heart, expecting to get taken off on an adventure in time and space, and they've been lectured to, they've been targeted, and they've been, in some cases, just told to leave. So Doctor Who returns next Christmas 2026, with a special, as yet starring who knows who. We're pretty sure it's going to star Billy Piper. We know it's going to be written by Russell T Davies. We think it'll be on for about an hour. It'll probably be on Christmas Day as well. But apart from that, we know nothing. We'll wait and see what happens, what gets announced in due course. I'm pleased to hear that you're actually, Bob, I think that some of the things that you've said have shone a lot of fresh light on the situation, things that I'd not considered before, certainly. And I know there'll be a lot more to talk about over the next 12 months. When isn't there when it comes to Doctor Who? But I don't know, maybe the light will come on somewhere with someone involved in the process. I'd like to think so. Thank you, everybody, for all the comments. Let us know what you think. Mull it over some more. And yeah, we'll get back to you, and we'll see if we can arrive at some sort of answers altogether. Somehow, maybe.
You're watching Type 40. Stupid tune anyway.
Yes, our live commenters there, they do a good line in pun, Bob. We've had several people saying this is a turning point for Type 40 Live. So I really enjoyed hearing from you and seeing you here with us live on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and X. Thank you so much. Have you scratched an itch here? Have you scratched the geeky itch?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming the people watching will now know that I do appreciate, and like, this is the thing as well. I always get like troped because I'm a right winger who is very active in the political scene, as someone who just doesn't like anything fun or like hyper criticizes everything, like every form of media. However, like, I largely enjoy things that I enjoy, including Doctor Who. Some would consider me a geek back in secondary school. They certainly did. It just happens to be that I also hold to the opinions that I do for a sort of career.
You find that people, I suppose they do. I mean, collectively, geeks get sort of banded together as it is Charlotte, and they assume that everybody likes all the same things. It couldn't be further from the truth. And so I suppose if you're involved in any kind of movement too, then it would come with all of these preconceived ideas. And I think that Doctor Who, as something that would attract outsiders, I suppose really anybody who would be considered an outsider was kind of by default people who were unorthodox and were more difficult to group together. And yet that's not how the people who make the show see the fans. But I've never been convinced that they understand Doctor Who itself, so why would they understand the fans anymore?
No, especially when you've got a show for this long on air, you get so many people that love it. You get so many viewpoints. You get people with life stories. And I feel like media in general and peak creatives sometimes seem to forget that as humans, we're complex beings. We have different backstories and different thoughts, and you can't group us as easily as I think in their heads they think they can.
And whilst we'll never be able to put it all to rights here at Type 40 Live, we're going to do our best over the next 12 months to talk it all through. That way we may be prepared for anything, Bob. I think that's the best way forward, to prepare to be disappointed. And then if you're not, then you're always up on the deal. That's what I'd like to think. What I tell you something, though, the one thing I couldn't ever be prepared for was this, but you can all the gift that keeps on giving, this picture. I don't think she'll ever live it down, no matter how good or not the following special is. But you can come and say hello to us, as always. Of course you can. Instagram and X at Type 40 Doctor Who. Join us in the Type 40 Facebook group as well, if you like, to talk about both this and that and that and that and them and everything else concerning all things Doctor Who, the past, the present and the future. Get your feedback into us through SpeakPipe 2, the podcast and the live stream. Any constructive criticism, any rant, any rave, absolutely fine. The link there is in the description, as is the playlists there. That's also up. So if you want to relive past glories or our darkest days, it's all there. The depths of despair and the most joyous of joys in our previous live stream. So go and get loaded in the nicest possible way over in the playlists. And of course, there's the Type 40 podcast across all major podcatchers and our home feed at type40.podbean.com. How about you, Bob? Where can people find you? So you're on YouTube, you've got a podcast, you've got your work with Turning Point UK, you've got other work, other projects that you're involved in. Where should people go? What's the easiest route that they can get as much about everything that you're involved with as possible all at once, and then decide what they're gonna follow? Where can they find you?
Yeah. So firstly, if you want me for consistent Doctor Who content, that's mainly for the guys here I'm with. I mostly talk about religion and politics. However, like I said, I don't really care what people think. I don't really appeal to any particular audience. If someone asks me about a show, or I feel like it's necessary to talk about the direction of a show that I like, I'll speak about it. So Young Bob Studio on YouTube, and also Cross and Corner. Cross and Corner being an organization that I found to really be the Christian alternative to Turning Point UK. So you have crossandcorner.org is the website, and you can find us on Twitter at YoungBobTPUK and Cross and Corner. So yeah, we're mostly on TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter, and it's just Young Bob. And from there, you can find all the other links.
Excellent. Your work with Turning Point UK continues. Obviously, the loss of Turning Point's founder a few months ago affected everybody, whether you were aware of him and his work, or what Turning Point was in itself on a human level that affected so many people. And obviously, our condolences to everyone who's involved in Turning Point on any level. What are the plans there for 2026 and your involvement?
Yeah, so we're planning a national tour. I'll give the location, starting down from Scotland, working down to Wales, where we'll have speaking events and also a stand. This is largely just to reflect, firstly, it's 14 stops, which was the same number that Charlie was set on when he was unfortunately shot at Utah University. Also, we're looking towards a scheme where we make sure there is a map in each constituency to tactically vote for young people, because of course, first past the post, if you're not familiar, it just means that if you have two parties on the right you can't just vote for the one that you want, but rather what is the most likely to win. So that's one thing we're going to work on. And also gratifying chapters, societies. That means that they get funding from the university and invite us on campus.
I know that you believe passionately that young people should be encouraged to take their vote seriously, don't you? That's something that we don't talk about politics very often on the show, but it does crop up. And one big frustration that I have, not just with younger people, actually with British people generally, and something that when we speak to Americans, I say they've got it right, is that so many people in Britain do not use their vote at all. And you're a big believer, aren't you, in encouraging young people to be very aware of the hard-fought right to vote, and that one vote, one voice can make a difference. Is that generally where you come from?
Yeah, if you look at Sarah Polchin, which was one of the latest Reform MPs, we're not party political at Turning Point. You can have your grievances, whatever right-wing party. We just largely believe that the alternative is left-wing populism, which we're totally against. However, Sarah Polchin won her seat based on 6 votes. Each area is different. You can either be like Caerphilly, where you have like a 4,000 voter discrepancy, or you can live in a constituency like Sarah Polchin's, where you're only winning off 6 votes. So it's very much to do with your area and the people that you are with. And it is very important to get votes, because even if a party doesn't win, if they get a lot of votes and they get a large percentage pool of the share, that just means next general election they get a lot of donations, they get a lot of support, they get more media coverage because of their voter share, which then in turn allows for this sort of track in order for them to get power. And that is the biggest thing that people need to understand. That just because you don't win an election first time doesn't mean the second time you don't come back stronger because of the support you initially got. But just going towards Charlie Kirk, it was amazing. So 2 days after his death, we organized a vigil in London. Now, like you said, many people weren't familiar with Charlie Kirk, his work, his organization here in the UK, because largely there's a barrier politically with what's going on across the pond in both ways. And we have never had a Turning Point UK demonstration pull in as many numbers as it did towards his vigil. Thousands of people on the streets paying their condolences towards a man that they never knew. So I think that was largely upsetting and motivated so many of us to make sure that his legacy here in the UK was actually well kept.
Well said. I can't follow that, so I'm not going to even try. Hear more from Bob. All those places, the links will be in the description, as always. And by all means, my friend, if you want to scratch the geeky itch at some point in the future, you're more than welcome to come back and talk about Doctor Who at any given time. But yeah, for now, thank you so much for your company. We really appreciate you taking the time. We'll keep an eye out for you out there, wherever, won't we, Charlotte?
Yeah, it's been lovely to have these. I like these debates when we can just talk on a focused thing and throw ideas around. I always really enjoy these streams.
More levers and ideas being thrown around later in the week, of course. Join us for more Charlotte, myself, and another assortment of rogues. Not that kind of rogue, real rogues and reprobates, our fellow panelists here at Type 40 Live for the Big Who, coming this Thursday from 8 p.m. As always, what we're going to be talking about, well, we sort of know, and you'll know if you turn up then. So, yeah, we'll keep it to ourselves between now and then. But you can be sure it will be a good one. It will set you up for the weekend just right. But that's it. Again, thank you, Bob, for your time, and everybody else for the comments. We'll catch up with you on the next one. This is Type 40 Live, where we always have the time if you have the space. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye. Cheers, Bob.
Cheerio.